Good morning. My name is David Ando Coupland, and this is my first talk with Great Mountain Zen Center. I'd like to thank Roshi for giving me this opportunity. Although I'm a longtime meditator, I'm a beginning Zen student, and I've only been with Great Mountain Zen Center for about 2 years. So my approach to Zen is I don't know. So the views expressed in this talk are not necessarily those of the management. This is mostly a way-seeking talk. In other words, a talk about my spiritual journey so you can get to know me better. But I thought I might structure it around Dogen Zenji's famous passage from the Genjokoan. To study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be verified by all things. This translation is by Shohaku Okamura in his book, Realizing Genjokoan. Genjokoan can be translated as actualization of reality. It is the first chapter of Shobo Genzo, the True Dharma I Treasury, which is a collection of Dogen's essays and considered to be his masterwork. So let's begin. The first line is, to study the Buddha way is to study the self. Studying the self is a central practice in all schools of Buddhism, beginning with Shakyamuni Buddha. My first experience with studying the self occurred in the 10th grade when my favorite science teacher was out for a day. Our substitute teacher was a philosophy major, not much of a science guy, so we spent the hour on a philosophical exercise. He asked for a volunteer and asked them, "Why are you here?" "To learn," was a typical response. "Why do you want to learn?" "So I can go to college." "Why do you want to go to college?" "So I can get a good job," etc. Eventually, everyone reached the point where they had to admit they didn't know why they wanted to do that. When it came to my turn, my final response was, "So I can make a contribution." "Why do you want to make a contribution?" Long pause. "I don't know." I continued to think about this for months afterwards, questioning the motives for my every action and thought. I eventually concluded that all my actions were directed toward obtaining pleasure or avoiding pain. Even seemingly altruistic actions like helping people produced a little squirt of internal pleasure that was my direct motivation. Pleasure at seeing other people happy was still my pleasure. From my present perspective, I see this as the second skandha, the pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral sensations associated with all experiences. It's too bad there wasn't a Buddhist teacher available in rural New Hampshire at that time, as this investigation would have been an excellent starting point for meditation practice. Not long after this experience, I was off to college, then grad school, then I got a job, got married, built a house, had 2 children, etc. Not much time for spiritual inquiry. In 1987, we moved back into the city of Ann Arbor from our 5 acres in the country. I had had a strong interest in understanding what was going on with this human life since my mid-teens, and it seemed like a good time to get serious about it. Zen Buddhist Temple Ann Arbor was founded in the early 1980s by Samo Sunam, a Korean monk. It was located in a large Victorian house near downtown that had fallen into disrepair, and it was extensively renovated by an enthusiastic sangha of young people using what Sunam called devil energy. My first experience there was a weekend retreat in November. Very little instruction or orientation was given. We were awakened at 4:30 on Saturday morning and headed down to the Zendo. prostrations began at 5. I had no idea how many prostrations we would be doing. Every 25 prostrations, the leader shouted out a line from a gatha. Great is the problem of birth and death. Impermanence surrounds us. Be awake each moment. Do not waste your life. I began to think we would continue doing prostrations until we each passed out. But we ended after 108 prostrations. In later years, be awake each moment became a guiding goal for me. Zen Buddhist Temple, Ann Arbor maintained a strong Zen atmosphere, candles, incense, chanting, bells big and small. Keeping the schedule was paramount. The resident priest was a woman named Sukha, which means happiness, who later became Haju Sunam. Haju was incredibly dedicated and literally devoted her entire life to her practice and Zen Buddhist Temple, Ann Arbor. Samo Sunam was a great temple builder and established temples in Ann Arbor, Toronto, New York City, Chicago, and Mexico City, and under the umbrella of the Buddhist Society for Compassionate Wisdom. There was a regular schedule of weekly practice, weekend, and 10-day retreats. The starting meditation practice there was counting the breath from 1 to 5 in Korean. And I did this for the entire 5 years I stayed with Zen Buddhist Temple, Ann Arbor. At first, it was difficult to keep the mind on the breath, but over time it got easier. There was never any explanation of why we were counting the breath or how much this might lead to any kind of enlightenment or liberation. Somehow I got the idea that if I could completely stop my thoughts, then true reality would be revealed. I remember working extremely hard on this on one retreat. I became like a cat watching a mouse hole. As soon as a thought began to form, I squashed it. For a time, I succeeded in completely stopping my thoughts, and I saw nothing special. Just a kind of ringing silence and awareness. No great revelation, but this experience did show me beyond any doubt that I am not my thoughts, Descartes notwithstanding. In 1989, I attended a 10-day retreat at the Toronto Temple, which was a beautifully renovated old church. The Zendo had a newly laid hardwood floors, vertical windows, and a soaring ceiling. I took the precepts on this retreat and received the Buddhist name Chiryo, Chiryo. Theodore once said maybe his Buddhist name should be Fruit Loops. Everyone in my class had a name beginning with Chi, and Sunam said that meant wisdom, but he said my name meant the master in charge of help and service. He may have been poking fun at me for asking at a board meeting what we were doing for community service. Still, receiving this name had a long-term impact on me. Before the precept ceremony, we were to do 300 prostrations, and Sunam did them with us. He was about 50 at the time. When we reached 300, he yelled, 33 more. So we did 33 more. I worked very hard on my practice of counting the breath on this retreat and experienced blissful states of concentration despite the pain in my knees and back. Over the course of the day, the sun moved around until it was shining through the tall windows on me. I felt the sun was shining right through my body. Several times I felt like I was levitating and reached down to touch the cushion just to check. Although blissful, this was not the insight I was looking for in meditation practice. I asked Sunam during an interview, what is the point of this practice? He said, are you expecting your head to split open and rays of light to come out? Actually, I was expecting something dramatic like that, but it never happened. Not long thereafter, I was admitted to a 3-year Dharma teacher training program. During the first year, I memorized and repeated constantly the Great Compassion Dharani, 3 pages of nonsense syllables. I did 108 prostrations every morning and attended group meetings along with the usual weekly meditation and retreat schedule. But I quit after a year, unable to balance my tasks as a homeowner with the demands of the program. I cried out loud when I told Haju I would not continue. In 1992, I met Barbara Brodsky at the Zen Buddhist Temple, Ann Arbor. Barbara was beginning to teach Vipassana, or insight meditation, to a small group out of her home in Ann Arbor. I expressed my frustration that after 5 years with Zen Buddhist Temple, Ann Arbor, I still didn't know how this practice would lead to any kind of insight or liberation. And she invited me to try a different approach. Insight meditation is moment-to-moment awareness of the mind-body process, a direct way of studying the self. It is based on the meditation instructions given originally by Shakyamuni Buddha, and is the main meditation practice in Theravada or Southern Buddhist tradition today. One way to do insight meditation is to mentally note or label each thing arising in the mind. Hearing, remembering, pain in the knee, remembering, planning, anxiety, etc. Another way is to notice each mental event as it arises and passes away without actually mentally labeling it. We were told to be the witness, not the judge. As concentration deepens, the popcorn-like nature of the mind becomes apparent. Mental events are arising and passing away many times a second, impermanent, and no one is doing it. Grasping at experience leads to a train of thought which is ultimately unsatisfactory. These are the 3 marks of existence described by the Buddha and the heart of his teaching: suffering caused by grasping, impermanence, and no self. Insight meditation was my main practice for the next 25 years. Another guiding principle became, do everything with a mind that lets go, which was a saying of the 20th century Thai meditation master Ajahn Chah. Insight meditation was so different from the focused concentration practice I'd been doing with Zen Buddhist Temple, Ann Arbor. Opening my awareness to everything present, I was shocked to discover tremendous tension in my neck and shoulders. This tension had been with me at least since college and was connected to frequent migraines and tension headaches, but somehow I had never been directly aware of it. I found that resting my attention on my knotted neck muscles and obsessive train of thoughts, trying to plan and control my life, allowed both to relax. Skipping my morning meditation usually leads to a headache later in the day, even now. So I'm very regular in my meditation. In addition to being a Vipassana teacher, Barbara is a channel for a spirit named Aaron. At first, I was very skeptical of Aaron. I'm a science guy. My childhood role model was Mr. Spock of Star Trek. Logic. One of the things that attracted me to Buddhism is that it did not depend on a belief in its supernatural. But to my own surprise, I gradually came around to believe in Aaron. One factor that I was surrounded by people that believed in Aaron, and they were mostly professional and university types who seemed to have good judgment. I think we can all see this as a very powerful force when you're surrounded by people that believe one thing. It's easy to believe that too. Another factor was Aaron himself. Barbara would sit in a meditation posture, close her eyes, and after about 30 seconds, there'd be a little jerk or start. And then this big smile would spread across her face, and she would say, "Good evening, and my love to you all. I am Aaron." Aaron would then launch into a Dharma talk, which was clear and insightful, full of love and compassion, well organized, and with no notes. Aaron said that in his last human lifetime, he was a Buddhist monk in Thailand in the 15th century. Currently, he existed on a higher plane of existence where he had access to the big picture, so to speak. However, Barbara and Aaron made a conscious effort to separate dharmas from spirit stuff. Hence the name of the organization, Deep Spring Center for Meditation and Spiritual Inquiry. In theory, you didn't have to believe in Aaron to participate in the meditation teachings from Barbara. I finally accepted Aaron after reading a booklet of his talks called No Chain at All. It was about the 12-fold chain of dependent origination, one of the core teachings of the Buddha, but from a Mahayana emptiness perspective. I've been reading a lot of books on Buddhism and meditation by authors like Thich Nhat Hanh, Jack Kornfield, Stephen Levine, and others, and No Chain at All seemed to go beyond all of that. I didn't see how Barbara could have produced it on her own. I learned a great deal from Barbara over the 12 years we were together. She is truly one of the wisest and most loving and compassionate people I've ever met. Barbara completely lost her hearing after the birth of her first child. We spoke to her with a combination of lip reading and signing the first letter of each word. Deep Spring Center soon rented a space in a strip mall that became our meditation room. We offered weekly meditation and weekend and week-long retreats. I have fond memories of our week-long retreats at Emick Retreat Center in rural Michigan. The teachers were Barbara, Aaron, and John Orr, an insight meditation teacher who studied with Ajahn Chah in Thailand in the 1970s. After dinner, the 30 of us or so would sit outside on the grass in front of Barbara and John for the evening Dharma talk. The sun was warm and dragonflies cruised over the grass. An ancient catalpa tree was in full bloom during our June retreats. There was so much commitment and joy. I felt like we were the original Sangha in ancient India. Barbara started a meditation teacher training group in 1995, and I was one of the first 3 participants. This grew to about 10 committed students who led sittings, taught classes, and assumed leadership roles at Deep Spring Center. I taught a number of introductory insight meditation classes for community groups, co-led a weekend retreat, and served on the board of directors. Out of my love and respect for Barbara, I will not go into details of what caused me to lose my belief in Aaron. Nothing unethical. Suffice to say, I was listening to Aaron talk and I think it was 2003, and it suddenly hit me like a ton of bricks. This isn't real. Aaron, whatever he is not a spirit on a higher plane of existence. I have no doubt in Barbara's honesty and sincerity. Barbara believes in Aaron, and I believe Aaron is a separate person in some sense. The whole thing is really quite remarkable and mysterious to me, even now, because on one hand, we have this phenomenon, which I don't believe is real. On the other hand, Barbara and Aaron were so effective as meditation teachers. Aaron presented a very appealing worldview. We are all sparks of God. On a journey through many lifetimes, we learn and grow spiritually, eventually returning to God. We are God creating itself. Everything in our lives, good or bad, is a learning opportunity. Losing faith in Aaron caused me to lose faith in Barbara's teaching and in God. The rug had been pulled out from under my whole worldview and self-view. Maybe I'm wrong about Aaron. Maybe nothing would make me happier than to meet Aaron after I die and realize it was all true. In 2004, I fulfilled a lifelong dream to hike from Georgia to Maine on the Appalachian Trail. I started on April 4th and finished on October 2nd and saw the whole arc of the seasons from spring wildflowers in the southern Appalachians to fall color in Maine. Much of the time I hiked alone during the day and camped with others at night. And I usually spent a couple hours a day meditating while I walked. It was like a whole separate lifetime, disconnected from my regular life of family, home, and work. At times I felt a lot of peace and gratitude, but I also saw that I brought my habitual thinking patterns with me. It brought to mind the saying, wherever you go, there you are. One pattern that became very clear was I called the grasper. When thoughts of past or future would arise, it was as if a hand in my mind reached out and grabbed onto them. I could feel this grasping energy in my body. It fed the thought's energy, leading to a train of more thought, more grasping, and off I would go. This is samsara, the circle of grasping and suffering, reenacted every 10 seconds. I'd been aware of this before the AT, but long days alone on the trail, it became as clear as day. I was 48 when I finished the trail. Since my mid-teens, I'd been wondering, what should I do with my life? It seemed that there was something I had to do or accomplish, discover something important, help people in some significant way, build something of value. But after returning home, it hit me that I didn't have to do or be anything. Just ordinary living was enough. This was tremendously liberating. So that's all about to study the Buddha ways, to study the self. Let's go on about to study the self is to forget the self. The first half of my working career was in industrial computing, image processing, and machine vision. In 2000, I started a small nonprofit to provide after-school computer clubs to underserved youth, but ran out of funding at the end of 2003. This was part of my effort to do something of value. After hiking the Appalachian Trail, I went back to school to get a teaching degree, and I spent the last 13 years of my career teaching high school science and math. I never thought teaching would be the right thing for me, but it turned out to be the most rewarding part of my entire career. During this time, I mostly practiced by myself, doing insight meditation and compassion meditations. I didn't have a teacher. I also sat with a group called Insight Meditation Ann Arbor, founded by my close friends Susan and Lou Weir, who were also students of Barbara and later studied with other teachers. Insight Meditation Ann Arbor is doing very well. They recently got their own space, and they have about 30 people that sit with them every weekend. So far, I've been talking about Buddhist meditation, or using Buddhist meditation to study the self. The second line we will consider from the Genjokoan is to study the self is to forget the self. What would it mean to forget the self? The non-self nature of sensations, emotions, and thoughts was fairly clear. But who was watching all this? One issue with meditation, insight meditation, is that there seems to be someone doing something. Actually, I think we forget the self at all times, all the time. We just don't notice it. In recent years, I've begun to see that the small self is not a constant presence. The Buddha compared the illusion of self to a person swinging a flaming torch in a circle at night. Our night-adjusted eyes see a circle of flame, when really the torch is in just one position at a time. A more modern analogy might be the sock man you sometimes see at auto dealerships. In response to some stimulus like praise or criticism, the small self inflates into being, ready to deal with the perceived opportunity or threat. But if we are attentive, we see it quickly deflates and is momentarily gone. Then it is triggered again by some thought, memory, or situation, so it seems to be a continuous thing. I've been noticing clues to when the small self is triggered. You could also say personal self. One good clue is tension in the body. The body is an excellent gateway into the mind. Another clue is self-talk. Self-talk is not inherently bad, but if I'm not attentive, the small self inflates to be the talker or the one being talked to, and I forget this imaginary situation is not real. The Pali word we translate as mindfulness is sati, S-A-T-I, which literally means to remember. So our mindfulness practice is constantly to remember. Sometimes I am sensitive to a bodily sensation associated with thinking, which is suggested by the phrase, the wheels are turning. When I become aware of thinking as opposed to being caught in the story, the question is, what am I thinking about? Often it is some story about the small self. Any kind of interpersonal drama activates the small self. And notice the tension and discomfort that accompanies drama. Memories of interpersonal drama can haunt us for years, continually reactivating the threatened small self. The small self is a personification of grasping and aversion. My wife Karen and I retired in 2019 and moved from Ann Arbor, Michigan to Longmont. We enjoyed the sunshine, the mountains, and being closer to our son and his family in Los Alamos, New Mexico. I joined Prairie Mountain Zen Center soon after arriving and met many wonderful people there, including director Cliff Clusen, Theodore and Marcia, and a Zen priest named Ewan McGee. Ewan will be offering a 6-week class on the Genjokoan beginning the first Thursday in October using this book. If you're interested, you can visit the Prairie Mountain Zen Center website and learn more there. I also did a retreat at the Eco Dharma Retreat Center and took classes from 2 of the teachers there. All wonderful people and good teachers, but not what I needed right then. In November 2021, as things were opening up from the pandemic, I attended a sitting at Great Mountain Zen Center. As soon as I walked through the door, I realized that this is what I need right now. So here I am. The third line we will consider from the Genjokoan is to forget the self is to be verified by all things. Other translations say enlightened by the 10,000 dharmas or actualized by the myriad things. Since Genjokoan means actualization of reality, this enigmatic line is central to the entire fascicle. What could it mean? I've revised this section 35 times in the last 3 days, so I don't have it written out. But I'm going to read you some things that Shohaku Akamura wrote about it, because he knows a lot more about it than I do. So Shohaku Okumura says that this line, to forget the self is to be verified by all things, has the same meaning as 2 earlier lines in the Genjokoan. I'm going to read them to you and then read you some of his comments about it. The 2 earlier lines are conveying oneself toward all things, conveying oneself toward all things to carry out practice enlightenment is delusion. All things coming and carrying out practice enlightenment through the self is realization. Like a lot of things Dogen said, it's like, what? You couldn't possibly, I can't imagine trying to make much sense out of Dogen's writings without a guide like this. But according to Okumura, this means that we take our distorted ideas and desires and move toward the world trying to find truth or reality. We try to see and capture reality with our minds, abilities, willpower, and effort. We try to become enlightened in order to put everything under the control of the self so that our life is stable and peaceful. This attitude, according to Dogen, is delusion. So basically, he's saying that someone doing something is delusion. The second line here is all things coming and carrying out practice enlightenment through the self is realization. And Okamura says that means that the subject of practice is not the personal self, but all beings. To practice is to awaken to the self that is connected to all beings, or the 10,000 dharmas. In our Zazen practice and in our daily activity of Bodhisattva practice, it is not a matter of individual actions based on individual willpower and effort. It is rather the myriad dharmas, or all beings, that carry out practice through our individual bodies and minds. Still rather puzzling. So I spent a lot of time trying to come up with my own interpretation. And the best I've come up with is to forget the self is for all things to verify or actualize our true nature of non-separation. In other words, when we're not obsessed with this illusion of the small self, everything teaches us, everything speaks to us about the true nature of reality, which is oneness or non-separation. Long ago at Zen Buddhist Temple, Ann Arbor, Sammo Sunam used to say that the trees and the rocks teach the Dharma, which I had no idea what he meant by that, but maybe this is what he meant. All things, we are verified by all things. When I try to connect this to my own practice, I think of my relationship with nature. It is wonderful to be here in Colorado near the mountains. I spend a lot of time hiking and biking, mostly by myself. Walking through the forest trails, I often feel aware of the world around me without grasping at anything. Everything is just as it is. No separation between rocks, trees, sky, and this two-legged creature. This is the growing edge of my practice. Perhaps it is a taste of to be verified by all things. In conclusion, I still don't know where I'm going with this practice. All I know is the path before me, which is to learn from my teachers and open to the great reality in and around me. Thank you for your kind attention.